Welcome back to the Sherdog Radio Network Rewind. I'm Jack Encarnacio, and it's once again time for the Sunday Sit-Down. Tito Ortiz is making the transition from being one of the all-time most famous and successful mixed martial arts stars to managing mixed martial arts fighters in a much different business than the one he dominated. But Tito Ortiz dominated different eras, participated and was a face of different eras in the history of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. He has a frontline view on a lot of the changes and developments, not only of the industry from a business perspective, but from the fight game and the in-cage perspective. Tito Ortiz joins us tonight to talk about that long arc over the course of his career, the development of the sport in this country, and where he's headed now that he's managing fighters towards the future. Tito Ortiz,
Perfect.
Welcome to the Sunday Sit-Down.
Thanks, man. I appreciate having on the show.
So here we are, and you're about to manage Cris Cyborg. This is the point in your career that you're at, into a fight on April 5th. She's going to make her debut for Invicta. First thing I'd ask you, Tito, why did you decide to link up with Cris Cyborg at this point, perhaps as your first MMA client, let's say?
Well, I really, it hasn't been a start of manager career. I've been doing it now for the last 6 months. Cris Cyborg actually tested positive for a banned substance in California, and she wanted to restart her career. You know, she's one of the most dominating women in her fight division, and she came to me as I started a management company, me and George Frazier, and really came down to what can we do for the future of many MMA fighters. I mean, as I done with my career, as I managed my career, I mean, the manager I had before me was Dana White, and I just want to do the right things for the future of many fighters out there. And Cris Cyborg came to me. She saw Tito. I had a world title around my waist, and all I had was a leather belt with a gold medallion on it, and that was it. No financial revenue has been built upon it, and no future for my career. And as being a world champion of any sport, you think that fighters should be making millions. And as I have through my career, I want to get the same opportunity for my clients and building a brand, and not only just as a fighter, but as building a brand themselves and making a career of a sport they love to do. And that's why I started managing Cris Cyborg.
There's no question that you were successful in building a brand in your UFC run. It was a different business, though, in terms of sponsorship opportunities, perhaps the ability to capitalize on them. The UFC and Zuffa was still kind of evolving their business plan and what they did and didn't want to control, things like that. I wonder, Tito, as you manage fighters now, if it's easier or harder now to build a brand as an MMA fighter than it was when you were on top.
I think it's a lot harder. There's so many opportunities, so many closed opportunities that happen for sponsorships to be into the UFC. Other companies, as Invicta, as we signed with, it's open. Just because the company is so new, it's given opportunities for other sponsorships to come about, not have to pay a fee to be a sponsorship for fighters. And I think that's just giving the opportunity for companies to come in and promote and to give, one of the biggest brands right now in the women's division, as Invicta is doing. And I just want to give an opportunity for all fighters to build a brand. And the only way to do that is have a management company behind them, pushing them, and not really worried about from fight to fight to fight, but worried about the brand in general of their name and of their fight career and their legacy. And that's what I'm trying to do, as I do with mine.
Of course, the pot at the end of the rainbow, so to speak, for Cris Cyborg is a potential fight with Ronda Rousey. It's been bandied about quite a bit in the media, all kinds of different representations made about what it would take to make that fight happen. Cris Cyborg, your client, says she can't make 135 in a healthy way. Ronda Rousey says she won't fight Cris Cyborg unless it's at 135. So to me, that means the fight will never happen. Am I wrong?
I believe it's wrong. Maybe Ronda is just afraid to fight her at 140 pounds. We want to do a catch weight. Fighters, fans want to see it. Both companies want to see it. Me as a manager and as a fan want to see it. Ronda Rousey has fought at 145 pounds many times. She used to compete in judo at 154 pounds. Did she run away from Cris Cyborg at cutting down to 135? Personally, I think so. And I believe Sean Shelby has said times before when he used to put the management, or she used to put the matchmaking together for Strikeforce, that Ronda wasn't ready for Cris. And now that Ronda has moved down to 135, it shows that she's afraid to fight Ronda at 145. But, she shows many accusations against Cris that she has, saying things that she's done, that Cris got to pass a drug test and so forth. Any place, any time, anywhere, Cris will pass a drug test, and showing that why she is the true 145-pound world champion. But first and foremost, I think it really comes down to her dominating Invicta. Thanks to Shannon in Invicta, to give an opportunity for women in all weights to compete in mixed martial arts, and not as UFC has really segregated strictly to just one weight class. And why in UFC they have so many weight classes in the men's division and only segregated to one weight division in the women's. And Invicta has gone beyond that by making that happen and having, from 105 up to 155.
Well, the fight is April 5th. It will be against Fiona Muxlow of Australia, an injury replacement for Edion Gomes. That will be Cris Cyborg's Invicta opponent. Tito, how many fights does Cris Cyborg have with Invicta, or is it not quite that kind of a relationship? I've heard maybe even there's still technically maybe a working relationship as it comes to Cris Cyborg between the UFC and Invicta.
Oh, of course there's a working relationship. They work really close with each other. There's a 3-fight deal. This one fight that she'll be fighting, she's supposed to fight Edion Gomes, who's the number 2 ranked 145-pounder. And I think she would have walked through her. I guess Gomes ended up getting injured. So now she's fighting number 10 ranked fighter, and I think, she should walk to her with no problem. And then her next fight, she'd be fighting for the world title, win the world title, and have one title defense, and then she'd be a free agent. And hopefully UFC can make this work at 145 pounds, or they end up adding a new weight class at 145 pounds. So either we get a catch weight at 140, or we fight at 145. But for Cris Cyborg to make 135, it's really hindering and handicapping my client. Why handicap a fighter who's dominated so many times 145 pounds to a woman who's cut down to 135 to keep away from my client at 145 itself?
So there, the game plan for Cris Cyborg from her manager and agent, Tito Ortiz. Tito, let's turn to your career and see what we might not learn about the development of the industry from your journey through mixed martial arts. One of the things that I noticed in your last few fights, particularly the Bader fight, the Rashad fight, was during your walkout to the cage, you were emotional, and it didn't seem like the emotions overcame you as you made your way to the ring, and in fact, backstage. But then I read your book, and I realized that crying before a fight was sort of a ritual for you, even when you were at the absolute peak of your game and dominating opponents. Can you tell me a little bit about why that became part of your fight ritual, crying in the back?
I think it just comes down to emotions. I'm an emotional fighter. I'm an emotional person in general. I guess it was just the fear leaving my body. If any fighter says he's not afraid of walking in the cage, they're lying to themselves or lying to the fans. I'm an emotional person, and I guess it's just the fear leaving my body. So when I walk in the cage, there's no longer any fear in front of me. I know what I need to do, and that's compete and give the fans what they want to see, and it's the greatest fight possible. Every fight through my whole career, besides Wes Albritton, that's the first fight I ever competed against, and I was free in the UFC. I think I was the only fighter in UFC history who ever fought for free.
Yeah.
And I fought the top guys in the world each time I've ever competed. The top 5 guys in the world every time I ever competed. I never had a gimme fight. I never had an easy fight. I've always fought the top guys no matter what. And, it's just one of those things. It's very emotional for me when I walk out. I go in and I put in a camp up in Big Bear. It's anywhere from 9 to 6 weeks. And I put in my life and soul into it. And when it comes out to fight, fans know I'm giving my all, no matter what. Win, lose, or draw, I come in, I give them my all.
Do you think about, before you go out to fight, kind of the long arc of your life, not just your fight career? Because, anybody who's at all familiar with your upbringing, your parents being addicted to drugs, life on the streets, some time in a gang, being next to someone who got dropped with gunfire in California there as a youngster, Are those the things maybe you also think about before you walk out, about how, the position you're in and how it contrasts to the path you were on as a young guy?
I think so, 100%. I think it really comes down to there were three choices I had in life: dead or in prison or where I am now. And I think I made some great decisions. And, I grew up with not many people to trust at all, with no one to trust. And my whole life I've had that problem. And when I go out and I fight, there's no one else behind me. I don't have no rich family. I don't have a silver spoon in my mouth. I fought and I've struggled and I prevailed through so many things. I mean, as a businessman, as a fighter, as a father, to give my children everything that that they have in front of them. I have three boys that I got to make sure I battle to give them a great future, so they don't have to steal to put food in their mouth, or they don't have to steal to put clothes on their back, as I did as I grew up. And my parents never taught me the right things. My mother, I'm very thankful for her leaving my father, and for a woman to be with a man for 14 years to get up and grab her son and leave the home. It's very big of her to do that. And I mean, any people in any type of relationships, it's hard to do that. And she did that for me. She did that for my future. And that's why for Christmas 2 years ago, I bought her a house, and I bought her a brand new Mercedes-Benz. I take care of my mom because my mom got me out of the streets. She kept me away from the drugs, kept me away from the gangs, and she gave me a second chance at life. And, my real name is Jacob, and in the Bible, Jacob wrestled against an angel, and the angel saved his life. If it wasn't for wrestling, that's what saved him. And for me, wrestling saved my life. And I look at it now, and there's so many kids that are into wrestling that keeps them out of gangs and off of drugs and, off the streets in general. As I teach at my gym at Punchman Training Center, I teach kids wrestling on Tuesdays and Thursday nights. And it's just one of those things that it's about giving back. I went to school to be a high school wrestling coach, to be an inspiration in kids' lives in the wrestling room. And instead of helping out with 30 kids in a wrestling room, I'm helping out over millions across the world of being an inspiration in their life. And I could say it over and over again. I'm not a role model at all, because I don't want any person or any kids to model my life, because I've done so many mistakes, and I've learned from those mistakes. But I've inspired people. I've inspired my family. I've inspired my friends and my children to be great. And I think the things that I've done great in my life are inspirations, and I think that's what people need to really focus on.
I mean, you've talked about, Tito, having your first joint, drinking your first beer at age 5. 5 years old was the first time you were touching that stuff. And I think, anyone who's had a tough life, a tough upbringing, that is a detail. That is an age that really puts it starkly. I mean, to be in that position. How can you explain to somebody who doesn't have, who came from a charmed life or had easy circumstances and an easy upbringing, their parents were there, they were dialed in, they weren't on drugs. How does it get to the point that you're doing drugs and drinking beer at a kindergarten age?
I don't understand it. My children now, I mean, my two boys, Jesse and Journey, just turned 5, and I couldn't even imagine that.
Yeah.
My son Jacob, who just is turning 11, I couldn't even imagine that. I grew up in the punk rock era, I guess you can say. I mean, back in the 80s, where drinking beer was a normalcy, smoking marijuana was a normalcy. Here in California, it's legal now, but it was just one of those things that was deep in my heart and deep in my mind, knowing those things were wrong. As I got older, I learned from them. I learned from my mistakes. The right thing, I think, was getting educated, was going to school, and as I say, wrestling is what saved me. Wrestling saved my life. My real name is Jacob. I battled against those things, drugs and, abandonment of my parents. I battled through those things to make me the person I am today. And I think the integrity I have, a lot of fans respect me because of it. And people say they see me, the way Dana portrayed me, and the way Chuck Liddell talked about me. Those things aren't true. Those things were never true. It was just a way of them to hold me down, because I was a fighter speaking out amongst the fighters and just trying to get paid to take care of my family. This is a business. And if fans are listening right now, you got to understand, everything is a business no matter what you do. You work a 9-to-5 job. You want to get paid more if you work harder. If you go out of your way to do better for the business or better for the company, you should get paid more. And I was going outside doing more for the business of UFC. I was trying to promote the brand of mixed martial arts and UFC of saying it's not a violent sport. And I think I respect it because of that, because I was educating the fans what the sport was truly about. It's about mixed martial arts. It's about 2 minutes or 1 man leave, but there was still 2 men in there that are competing against each other. This was competition. It wasn't a blood sport at all. It was competition. And the people who get their hand raised are the ones who work harder. And that's what it really came down to. And I look at it, and people got to listen to my words, and it's an inspiration value, I think. It's what I've shown through my life, that anybody in their life, no matter what they've had as a young age, at age 5, if they were drinking, if they're smoking weed, or if they were just exposed to drugs at a young age, as I was. I mean, there was in junior high where my friends and us were doing cocaine, dude. And, there was bad things in high school. Doing meth. There was bad things that I should have never been doing, but I was, susceptible to those things because my parents never cared. But I made the decision myself. And each person, either adults, kids, it don't matter. You got to make the decision on yourself of knowing what you want in life. Do you want to be second best, or do you want to be number one? And in my life, I wanted to be number one. And I think that's what it really comes down to, is people to understand you make the decisions for your future. No one else makes a decision. When you look in the mirror at night before you go to bed, you're looking at yourself. There's no one behind you. There's not a parent behind you. There's not a teacher behind you. There's yourself, and you got to answer to yourself. And people try to go to church and pray for God to help for their forgiveness and the sins they did, but it's on them. It's not on anyone else but themselves. They can look for other ways to be weak, and hopefully someone else can save them, but the only person who can save them is themselves. And that's what it really truthfully comes down to, and that's what I've kept to my heart like no other. I teach my children the same thing. We don't go to church, but I believe in being a good person. Treat people with respect and treat them the way you want to be treated, no other.
Certainly self-reliance is something that you had to pick up at an early age. You've talked in stark detail about, being embarrassed to bring friends around the house because you knew your parents would be in there getting high, your parents stealing things from you and others to sell, to get high. Just the classic, for lack of a better word, drug addict parents, just that story and being in that position and talking about doing what you have to do to make a dollar and get through the day. Your childhood, your youth, your teenage years, a lot of even later in life, as you 20s even, ripping off cars and stealing and things like that. And one of the things I always had trouble, Tito, understanding as far as trying to put myself in your shoes and understanding your story is when you were ripping off cars with your friends and things like that and stealing things, sometimes it seemed like reading your book, sometimes it seems like you did it because you needed money to eat, or you needed money to get through the day, or needed money for this and that. Other times it seemed like it was more recreation. It was fun. You were just a punk kid with all the other punk kids doing it. Which was it more often? Tito, stealing because he was desperate, or Tito stealing because he was rebellious?
I think it might have been a little bit of a mixture of both. I think it might have been stealing because I wanted to get what all the other kids had, because they had everything given to them, and I wanted to be as good as them, and I never was as good as them, ever. And I think it was the embarrassment of the clothes on my back were the same clothes I had through the whole year. And I'd go steal clothes just to be cool like the rest of the kids. The car factor, I look back on it, and I haven't thought about it in so long, since I wrote my book, actually. And I don't know, seeing other kids at the age of, 16, they had a car. I wanted a car. I didn't get in trouble because of stealing someone's car, and I learned from it, and I learned quick. And that was one thing that I learned, was learn from mistakes. And a lot of kids got to understand that. A lot of people in general got to understand. You got to learn from your mistakes. And then as I got older, I started learning from other people's mistakes. And I thought in my mind, there was something I learned in high school. One of the teachers told me, is like, Tito, think of it 10 times. If you can say it to your mind 10 times and you say it's wrong 10 times, it's probably wrong. If you say it 9 times, it's probably wrong. If you say it 5 times and you say that's probably wrong, it's probably wrong. But if you say it those 10 times, you can say, yes, it's okay, you're probably doing the right thing. And every time I did something wrong, I would say those things to myself. I would say, no, this is wrong, and I probably end up not doing it. And there's other times wouldn't think twice about it, and I would do it, and I'd look back and go, damn, I shouldn't have done that. But now, as I think about it, you know, as I got older, I got more mature. And at night when I go to bed, I'd lay in bed, and I'd think of myself as less of a person because of things I did. And it was a guilt factor, you know, when I look in the mirror, when I brush my teeth at night, I would look in the mirror and go, what are you doing to yourself? Before I got into wrestling, at the age of 19, I looked in the mirror and I didn't recognize myself. When the teacher came up to me, when the wrestling coach came up to me, and he's like, what are you doing to yourself? I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, you don't look so good. I'm like, I'm trying to make ends meet, man. And I was selling drugs at the time, and I looked in the mirror and I turned to my parents. And it scared me because I don't want to tell my parents. I wanted to become something different. I wanted to make the best of this life now. And the way I did it by changing myself, changing my whole outlook on life. I moved from downtown Huntington Beach, where all my friends were all drug addicts. I moved to the junior college, and I went to school and I got educated. And I thought outside the box. And outside the box was outside of the drug habits that all my other friends had. And that was to get educated and get my AA degree and get into wrestling. And thank God for wrestling. It saved me. I mean, I was on a path to nowhere. I was walking down the wrong path, and wrestling once again saved my life. And all of a sudden this UFC thing came about, and I got an opportunity like no other. And I just worked super, super hard. And after a year and a half of competition, I became the world champion. I never stole ever, you know, after when I started college wrestling. I never stole anymore. You know, I always helped people as I came up, and I always looked forward. And I still look back on that, and I teach my children these things. You know, I tell my kids I want to make sure you kids never have to steal, to put anything on put clothes in your back, put food in your mouth. If you feel like you want things that the kids around you have, you need to work for it. You need to get A's in school. You know, my kid Jacob, who's in private school, he's in the 4th grade. He reads at his 6th grade level. He gets straight A's. And I want to give these kids opportunities. I have 3 boys, and give them the opportunities I never had as a kid. And that's a father who is there for them no matter what.
I know later in your career, Tito, when you were on the road, when you were becoming famous, when you were dominating the light heavyweight division in the UFC, you know, you struggled with that because you had kids at home, but you were also living a very high life as a superstar. You know, certainly it wasn't difficult. Access to women, you know, lying, cheating, all of these things. These are things you've talked about and thought about and tried to, you know, teach yourself something about. But you do talk a lot, especially in your book, about, you know, how hard it hit you to realize that in a lot of ways, when you were at the top in the UFC, you weren't there for your kids like your dad wasn't there for you. And now it sounds like you've kind of come more full circle in that regard. But talk about how that ride has been, because just because you wanted it to be that way for your kids didn't mean it always was, especially when you were at the top.
Well, you know, I think it really came down as I was still a kid, and I was living a life that I never had. When I was a champion, I was getting the attention I never had. You know, my son Jacob, I had him when I wasn't ready to have a kid, I don't think. You know, my ex-wife at the time, Kristen, you know, I'm not saying I made a mistake, but I wasn't ready to have a child. I really wasn't. I wasn't mature enough to have a child. Financially, I was able to provide for him. But to me, in my mind, I was trying to work for his future, to pay for his school. I mean, my son Jacob, he can go to any college in the United States that he wants to go to. It don't matter if it's Harvard, Stanford, don't matter. He can go to any university he wants to. And I battled with that myself, you know. With my marriage, I battled with that. And I had to come to a point in my life where I had to own my problems, and I did, and I confronted my problems, and I confronted her, and I told her the truth. And we went our separate ways, and I gave her a big lump sum of money to take care of my son. I gave her all my money, actually, to take care of my son, and restarted my life. And when I turned 30 years old, you know, I met Jenna, and we had 2 beautiful sons. And once again, I started falling back into the problem that my parents had, a drug problem, not with myself, but with my relationship. and I didn't want my kids to fall in the same situation. And it goes back to people seeing me get arrested for a domestic violence that never happened. And that really hurt my image. It hurt myself, hurt my self-confidence. It hurt me bad like no other. And people look, and they can see everything else on TMZ, and the lies behind it. And I was just defending for my kids because I saw my family turn into the same problem. And that problem is still about. And I'm starting to come to a situation right now is there's a crossroad right now. And what comes first? My children or our relationship? And number one is my children. And it's a problem that I really got to focus, and I got to, make a big decision on. But I say at the end of the day, I'm 38 years old now. I'm a man.
Yeah.
And I got to take care of my kids. My children are 4 years old now. And from this point out on, they start remembering everything. And I got to make sure that they know that, there's no drugs in this house. There's no drugs around us. And, the partying situation, all that. I'm an old man now, man. I mean, not an old man, but I'm an older man now where I got to be responsible. And being a responsible parent is waking up with my kids at 6:30 in the morning, getting them ready, getting them dressed, getting them ready for school, taking them to school, dropping them off. I go and pick them up at lunchtime. And that's my responsibility as a parent. And I'm going to do that. And, another person in my relationship doesn't want to do that. And what can I say, man? I'm just trying to do my best as a father, and I'm going to do my best as a father. And I work hard for my kids. And I put away money for their future. And that's what I'll continue to do. And I'm just trying to be the best father I possibly can.
Let me dial back to something, Tito, relative to your formative experiences, because we've done a lot of these sit-down interviews here on the Rewind. Last year, we had Frank Shamrock on, one of your great career opponents. You didn't win that fight, but it was, one of the signature fights over the course of your career, and you can point to that fight as you improving and changing a lot of things in your game. But aside from that, Frank was talking about how the first day, or one of the first days, I think, he was in the Lion's Den training room, and of course there was friction with Ken, and, Ken really beat him down. Ken just, at the time, Frank didn't have a lot of wherewithal in terms of fighting skill. He was relatively tough. He was a street kid from California, a lot like yourself, and he just got beat down. And he came out of that with a kind of a motivation, or at least kind of a resolve. Inside he felt stronger because he'd been through that, I think. And with you tell a story about the gang life as a youngster and get involved with F Troop, and you had to get beat into the gang. People know this as a gang initiation. A bunch of kids beat the hell out of you before you can get into the gang. You talk about actually fighting back, even though that isn't the idea. On an initiation like that, you're just supposed to take your beating and then accept it, initiation afterwards, but you actually find yourself punching back and fighting. And there are so many different paths that fighters take in mixed martial arts to fighting. Not all of them have difficult upbringing. Some of them are just fine. Some of them hadn't had a fight in their life before they put on the gloves and fought for money. But for you, I wonder if that experience, or some of the other violence you experienced in your childhood, kind of helped you in terms of getting into the cage at a time when, look, now it's a lot more of a defined and developed sport and much more of an athletic contest than even it was, in the early 2000s and late 90s when you were fighting. It still felt a little bit like a street fight in some ways, even though both guys brought different skills to the table and tried to utilize them. So going through something like that, gang initiation, tell me if that has any effect at all, if that was ever something you called upon in fighting mixed martial arts.
I think it really called upon in training, how rough was life back then compared to now. And I was in survival mode. My whole life I've been in survival mode. And, it's survival of the fittest. And that's how my life has been since day one. I've grown up in the punk rock era. We used to slam dance all the time and mosh pit and, getting in fights all the time. There was no guns. There was no knives. It was fist fighting. A real man puts his fist up. And that's what I've always learned. And as you talk about me getting jumped in, or get jumped in, get punched in the face a bunch of times, and I couldn't handle it more, and I had to fight back. And the veteranos, which are the older gang members, they looked up to me. They're like, "You're the first person who's done that. Most of the kids take a beating." And I remember when I ended up having to leave until one of my friends got shot, and I had to get jumped back, and I fought back. I ended up socking like 4 of the kids in the face, and I stood my ground, and they respect me for that. And that's a respect value that I've learned. And a lot of people don't understand a lot of things that I've gone through in life, and I think that's what makes me the man I am today. And it's hard to say it because, oh, Tito's in a gang and he's tough now. No, it's the respect values that I learned. I didn't learn it from my mom and my dad. I learned it from the gang members that taught me how to respect your elders, how to respect the older guys that are in the gangs, and respect elders in general. I didn't learn how to open doors for women. I learned how to respect women. I mean, that's what gangs taught me. And of course, I learned the facts of life by watching the facts of life, man. By watching movies, by watching how stories are told, and the feeling and the love and the hate and the remorse and just the in general fighting to live is what I've done in life and what I've got when it came to the cage. When I got in the cage and I fought, I was in survival mode. And once again, it's survival of the fittest. And I put in the training. I put in the hard work. People go, Tito, you train like a maniac, man. They had to kick me out of the gym. I mean, the first 7 years of my career, when I had no injuries, I had no problem in the gym. I would go in and I'd put my life on the line, I thought. And and as injuries came about, when I got slammed on my head when I had my first neck injury, my arms and legs went numb completely, and I laid in the mat up in Big Bear for 2.5 minutes. And people don't understand those little small things about that, besides the people that are in my training camp, my trainers. And they're like, Tito, how are you doing this, man? How are you getting beyond this? And I think it was just a mental focus, a mental strength that I had deep within. I mean, this is stuff you don't teach people. This is stuff that you learn on your own. And it was just, I had to provide for my family. And then that's what it really came down to. And people sit there and say, I mean, I hear people like Johnny Bones Jones saying, oh, Tito's always talking about money. Yeah, that's why you're making millions of dollars now. That's why you're driving around in a Bentley. Because guys like me who put their life on the line, who put their body in jeopardy to fight for what you guys are making now, that's why. You guys are making pennies, if not. You look at the in general of what boxers make in professional boxing, they make up to 60%, up to 40 to 45% of the purses that are made in the pay-per-view, compared to 6% of UFC that fighters make. Now, what are we doing different that boxers are doing different? I went outside the lines of going out and promoting. I was the first fighter to make fighter cards. I was the first fighter to make a clothing company. I was the first fighter to go out to Iraq and support our troops. And then UFC followed right behind by doing it. I was the guy going outside doing that. That's why I thought in my mind that I should be making more money, because I was going outside of educating the fans of what mixed martial arts really about. And it wasn't a blood sport. This was a true sport. And I really think and look at it as, what is the hard work I put about it? And should I get paid in the long run of it? And that's what I did. Now that I'm retired, what if I didn't do the clothing company? What if I didn't do the gyms? What if I didn't do the supplement line or the management company? What would I be doing right now? I would have no money. I would have nothing. I wouldn't have a home. I wouldn't have nice cars. I wouldn't have these things. I'd be surviving on, $150,000. People say, $150,000 is a lot of money. Yeah, it's not when you pay 50% of that goes to taxes. Another $25,000 of that goes to your training camp. Then you got to pay for your food. Then you got to pay for your trainers. Then you got to pay, your rent. I mean, there's many fighters out there who compete, who were world champions, who don't even own homes. Why? I never understood that. And I look at a company now that's a billion-dollar company, and there's fighters who are trying to scrap to survive, to even buy a home, scrap to survive even to provide for their family, and a billionaire company is busting guys' balls for 10 grand. Well, I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. How can people live their life and be respectful and sleep at night while fighters are killing themselves in the gyms, and still being world champions, and nothing's changing their life? As a Cris Cyborg, she came to me, she goes, Tito, I'm a world champion, and nothing in my life has changed. And I'm going to make that difference in making that happen for her.
Yeah, and that's something you've been vocal about and been associated with throughout the course of your career, and it's just something you've fought for. It's something that you've had no problem being that guy that would drive the hardest bargain imaginable and kind of upset the status quo in terms of, Zuffa when they took over the UFC and how they did business. And we'll get to that for sure here, Tito. I did want to ask you about one thing here as you came up in your career, and that's ethnic identity. I think it's maybe symbolic that when you came to the cage, for the most part, you had a two-sided flag. You had a Mexican flag and you had an American flag. You didn't just have a Mexican flag, which a lot of Mexican-American athletes, including Cain Velasquez, do bring to the cage, do want to be associated with, do feel pride in. But for you, it was always America 50%, Mexico 50%, maybe even America 75% and Mexico 25%. You weren't fluent in Spanish. Your father was Mexican. Your mother was white. And it just wasn't, while you did have Mexican blood, it just wasn't something you were closely associated with. Yet as you came up in mixed martial arts, it's always been clear that there's a lot of money to be made if you can find a Hispanic star in MMA. That's who Cain Velasquez is becoming. That's who they tried to make Roger Huerta. Even now today, Eric Perez, they're trying to go in that direction with in the UFC. And I wonder if you came to a point in your career, and I remember you trying to learn a bit of Spanish and trying to communicate in Spanish, but it wasn't really natural. If over the course of your career, ethnic identity was something you struggled with in terms of how to identify yourself, and maybe the market force is telling you to emphasize your Mexicanness even if it wasn't there.
Well, it really came down to, when I grew up, our parents really didn't teach us Spanish. My dad never taught us Spanish because we were looked down upon as Mexicans. Just recently, over the last 10 years maybe, that parents have been going, well, you got to learn Spanish now. You have to learn Spanish now. But before that, we were looked down upon. And they said, you got to speak English. You can't speak Spanish. You got to speak English because you're labeled as a wetback. And that was something that I kept upon myself. I had white brothers. My brothers were full-blooded white. My mother is full-blooded white. We lived in Huntington Beach. The only time that Spanish was spoken was at my grandma's house. But even at that time, she spoke English to us. She always taught us, saying, you got to learn English. You got to learn English. And that was my automatic language that I learned. That's what I knew. My brothers are white, and that's what we spoke. I look back on it, and I wish I would have spoke fluent Spanish. My kids now, they speak fluent Spanish. My son Jacob, who is white as complete, blue eyes, blondish brown hair, and he speaks more Spanish than I do. My son Jesse and Journey, they speak fluent Spanish. And I think it's just a different generation now. Back then, I'm 38 years old. Back when I was a teenager and younger, you weren't really supposed to speak Spanish, I don't think. We were looked down upon because of it. And now the times have changed to be, I think there's 30 million Mexican Americans here in the United States now. And by 2030, there's supposed to be over a third under 18 that are Mexican American kids in this United States. And it's showing that Mexican Americans are taking over. And that's why I wore a flag that was Mexican American. I didn't wear a Mexican flag because I'm Mexican American. My father's full-blooded Mexican. My mother is full-blooded American. And I have Mexican blood running through me. I think that's why I have the warrior spirit that I do. The way I fight is like no other. I eat Mexican food. That's carne asada tacos. That's my favorite. I can cook Mexican food like no other. Just because I'm not fluent in Spanish doesn't mean I'm not Mexican. And I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah.
You stick me in Mexico, I'm going to find a hotel. I'm going to order food. I'm going to find a bathroom. I'll be able to get in a cab. I'll be able to pay for my cab. I'll be able to get around and not have a problem by getting around by not speaking fluent Spanish. I can speak enough to keep me alive. I get lost in transition and a lot of verbs and so forth with Spanish because it's difficult. Don't get me wrong, because my number one language is English. But I think in general, as I learn and as I get better, I will get better. But it's challenging. It's very challenging.
Yeah.
For me.
Did you ever feel pressure in your career, Tito, to speak Spanish? To be that guy?
Yeah. Well, before I fought the tour, I had a interpreter, actually a tutor up in camp with me in Big Bear for the last 2 months of my camp, who came up 3 times a week and helped me with my Spanish. And it helped out a little bit. And I a big spiel that I was going to say after I won the fight, but I ended up losing to him, so everything kind of got squashed. It just changed my life.
So you had a plan to do some Spanish in your post-fight interview if you beat Couture?
100%.
Yeah, that's interesting. Your speech, right, your ability to speak, your ability to trash talk as far as picking fights in the early parts of your career, and then later, press conferences and announcing and things like that. It's been interesting to see you kind of try to address the public in different ways as a fighter looking to antagonize other fighters, and then as kind of like this businessman too. And it's been a hard transition, I'm sure, to suddenly have to be that way. And sometimes people talk about your speech patterns and things like that. And I saw something that you had said that kind of brought it forward for me. You said at some point you kind of wanted to stop cursing. You just, growing up in the circumstances you did, curses would just roll off your tongue. You just swear all the time. And there came a point where you said, I want to stop cursing. I don't want to send that message out there. And that was part of what tripped you up, right? That's part of what made you stumble on your words, is that you kept wanting to swear and you kept trying to squash it, right?
Well, I think it really came down to my children. I tell my kids, if you swear, it's showing how stupid you are, because you can't be intelligent enough to find a word to describe the words that you're trying to say, so you use cuss words. And I want to be, inspiration to my kids by showing them that you can say words without cussing.
Well, you better never show them the shirt you wore after the Guy Metzger fight.
Well, Guy Metzger fight, he wasn't even born at the time.
Yeah.
As I matured and as I became a world champions aren't supposed to cuss. They've got to be an inspiration. People say role models, but any athletes in general, you look at anyone, you look at Muhammad Ali, you look at any guys, they're not role models. They've gone through so many things in life that parents in general, going, I hope my kid never does that. There's so many things that athletes do that are bad that people go, I hope my kid never does that. So I think athletes in general should really not try to be role models. I think it should be inspirations. If you're going to be a role model, don't ever make a mistake. If you're going to be an inspiration, have those people inspired by the things you do in life, and as I've done in life, because I've done many bad things, but I've done many great things that I hope people look upon. And then, this public speaking thing, I think it really comes down to, all my interviews, I do phone interviews, radio interviews, I do great. But when it's put on a camera and after a fight, I can speak well. I'm fine with that. Right after a fight, when my adrenaline's rushing and everything just flows right off perfect, I'm fine with that. But before, when I started thinking about it and I just sit there and I want to articulate the things I want to say, I kind of wear my heart on my sleeve and I want to say bad things sometimes. And sometimes I want to say good things. And I catch myself saying things too fast, where I should slow myself down. And now that I know that, I'm learning it. And I'm taking classes, and I'm going to learn it. And each time I'll get better and better and better. You're not able to walk as a kid right off the bat. You got to crawl before you walk. When you hop on a bike, you got to get training wheels off, and you take training wheels off, and you ride your bike. And I think that's what it comes down to public speaking. You got to learn. You got to do the things. The only way to be perfection in that is to actually take classes, and I got to learn that. I just one of those things you got to learn. You got to do it. You got to do it over and over again in repetition. You look at Dana White when he first started doing his press conferences. He was horrible in the beginning, but as he started doing it more and more, he started getting better and better and better and better. And I know I'll get better at it. It's just a matter of time, a matter of practice, and just a matter of repetition.
What fight are you most proud of in your career?
Fight I'm most proud of my career is a tie. Has to be against Rivalries Silva, and I won the world title after only a year and a half of competition, and Ryan Bader when I beat Ryan Bader. Because after the surgeries I had, so many people counted me out. Financially, I didn't have much, and I was able to literally choke out for my next 3 guaranteed fights that took care of my family now to the rest of their life. And I'm very, very lucky. That contract was the biggest contract of my career. And I stood my ground for that contract. And I was able to fulfill that contract all the way through. And I was very lucky. And I'm very thankful for Lorenzo Fertitta and Dana White to give me the opportunity that I did after the Bader fight, when everybody counted me out besides my fans.
You talked about the injuries going into that fight. It's been something that's been a theme throughout your career. It's something that, you know, your MO was to say before the fight that you were 100% best shape of your life. If you came up short, or even if you won afterwards, we started to hear about the injuries. I wonder if we can put this to the fans this way, Tito. Can you simply list the significant injuries you've had in your career?
Yeah, well, let's see, I had a torn ACL before the first Shamrock fight, where they went in and replaced the ACL. That was 6 months before the fight, and that was challenging. I was like no other. Before the Couture fight, 1 month prior to the Couture fight, I had a bulged disc. It was an L45 S1. S1 was a ruptured disc. I got injections in my back. I think I got 12 injections in my back 3 weeks before the fight. I still competed. I still fought just because I didn't want to let my fans down. Let's see, UFC 106. I had a ruptured disc, C6, C7 on my neck. I had a fractured orbital bone due to a headbutt. People saw before that fight, and you can watch the tape over again, and I had a black eye. My eye was completely swollen for the weigh-ins. That's why I had my sunglasses on. And at the press conference, at the open workout before, I had sunglasses on. Actually, I had a headgear on, and people go, "Why do you have a headgear on while he's hitting pads?" Because I was hiding my black eye. Before Ultimate Fighter, after UFC 106, I ended up getting neck surgery. I was sparring with some of the guys for, the Ultimate Fighter Season 11, and I went to go train. Came back home. I wrestled, watched TV. I went to go get up, and I couldn't get up to stand up straight. I couldn't even walk, let alone that. And I went and got my neck X-ray, got my neck MRI'd, and they ended up finding that I had a ruptured disc in C6, C7. Literally 5 days before the ending of the season, my doctor said that I need to get neck surgery. I said, well, what's the chance of me training and continue on with the fight against Chuck? And he's like, well, you have a chance of going paralyzed. I know people answer this question. Is it worth to go paralyzed for $1 million? Not even a chance in the world. And I ended up pulling out of the fight, and on the Ultimate Fighter, they showed that I was afraid. And you guys go ahead and cut this out, that I was a pussy to fight Chuck Liddell, and which was complete BS. I already fought him once prior.
Twice prior?
I had to look for, before I fought Chuck Liddell the second time.
Oh, I see.
And, yeah, and then I ended up getting neck surgery, and like I say, they clowned me on Ultimate Fighter, saying I was afraid to fight him, that he knew I was going to fight, da-da-da. My children come first. I won't be able to throw football with my kid, and or even just wrestle with my kid. And so I had to go get neck surgery. I got neck surgery. I went through camp. It was fine. Fought at Matt Hamill after 6 months of neck surgery, and usually athletes don't come back after that. I ended up having to get neck surgery again right after the last, last Forest fight in UFC 148. I got, C5, C6 disc replacement, and now I get ACL replaced with my right knee here in May. I've gone through some serious damage, and I think that the worst one that I went through of all surgeries was having L45 S1 fused in my lower back, and that was right after the Machida fight. When I lost the Machida, I came to realize that, I fought against, Couture, Liddell, Evans, Machida, with a ruptured disc and a bulged disc in my lower back. And if anybody's ever had that before, try training with that. Try lifting weights with that. Try wrestling with that. Try sparring with that. Try wrestling with, there's so many things that I went through mentally that I just sucked it up. And there's so many guys now that just end their career and retire because they don't want to get surgery. And I battled through it because I still believe that I can do it. And I was able to come back after a year after getting the back surgery. And that was UFC 106. It was a year to date. And that's when I got slammed on my head and I had a ruptured disc in my neck. And it was just one thing after another. 15 years. There's not one other fighter in the UFC career that's been fighting for the UFC strictly for 15 years. Not let alone that, has broke the records that I have on pay-per-view, on The Ultimate Fighter, on fighting free for the UFC, so done what I've done for the UFC, but I've been looked down upon by Dana White and the UFC by the things that I've been outspoken about. And I look at it and I see the job that Chuck Liddell has, I see the job that Matt Hughes have, and it hurts. It might be a sour taste in my mouth, but it's fine. The past is the past.
Yeah.
I can't live in the past, and the future is now. And what am I going to do with the future? And I take care of my kids.
Tito, I'm sorry, Tito. Those injuries, that list is grisly. It's hard to hear. It hurts to hear, let alone to go through. Yet, and maybe it has something to do with what you talked about. So many different TV shows over the years where even the first Chuck fight was totally framed as you being afraid to fight and all this. And so, for the MMA fan, for the UFC fan in particular, who's just consumed everything the UFC's put out over the years, they have that idea. The UFC has forwarded that idea in their mind that your injuries are suspect, or that some of them are exaggerated. And I'm sure you hear that. I know a lot of fans, mean-spirited fans, like to joke about it and things like that, honestly. And I hear all those injuries, and you know what? I don't care if only half of them really happened. That is so challenging and so difficult to even imagine training and then going out to fight in. And I think it's important to grasp that. When you hear that people kind of laugh at that list of injuries, or that people joke about it, or that people roll their eyes about it, how does that make you feel?
It hurts. It hurts to even, every one of those is 100% happens. People, I literally want to make a shirt of my body frame and show it the nuts and bolts and screws and the plates that are in my body right now. It's just crazy. It's just crazy that I put myself through it. We have no retirement fund for UFC. These guys are billionaires off of us. We have no retirement fund. What's going to happen when I'm 50 years old? I'm 38 right now, and I go through pain every day that I wake up. There's times that I sit down and I just sit there and just holding the phone in my hand right now. I just feel my pinky and my index finger go numb just by holding the phone. So much damage that I've gone through. Where's the retirement fund for us? NFL has it, NBA has it, Major League Baseball has it. What about UFC fighters that we made them billions? How about kicking back to the guys that have literally killed themselves in the cage? But I can sit there and complain about it because I know I'll never get nothing out of it. I'm not going to get a job with the UFC, and I know that. I understand that. So, I'm going to go out and I'm going to try to make other means happen. And I see Couture signing with Viacom because UFC wasn't going to take care of him at all. They left him on his own. And, kudos for Couture looking out for his family, looking out for his life. And that's what it's truly about. We built this company on our own back. Lorenzo put his money behind it. Dana put his life in front of it by, being away from his family, by going out promoting. But as fighters, we put this company on our back and we fought for it. I went out and I promoted as much as I possibly could. We were going on tours with Dana for months on end and not getting paid a penny and asking, why don't you guys kick me 10 grand here, 10 grand there? And I remember Lorenzo just going, we shouldn't pay for your promotion tours. We'll pay for your hotels, we'll pay for your flights, but we shouldn't pay you extra money for it because you're going to get paid when it's fight time. I'm like, well, am I getting paid for my fights? I think this promotion should be extra. But these are little small things that us fighters we got to deal with. You look at a lot of fighters who were former champions that are forgotten about. There's guys like Evan Tanner who ended up taking his life, because of these things that UFC cut him. And he's forgot about it. He's never heard. UFC never say, rest in peace, Evan Tanner, for being a world champion, to be one of the guys who fought his butt off in the cage. You never hear that. They talk about Charles Mask, who made so much money to the UFC and ended up totaling his car because he was hammered. And I look at that, and it's just a disrespect to fighters in general. And I could say this now because I no longer compete in the UFC. And yeah, there has to be some type of thing. I think that fighters need to get some type of retirement fund or something to take care of us in the long run. Because what's going to happen? What's going to happen when Chuck Liddell's 50 years old? How's he going to feel? Mentally, how is he going to be? When I'm 50 years old, mentally, how am I going to be? Physically, how am I going to be? You know, and I just look at it, you know, about guys like, you know, Matt Hughes, you know, so many other guys that can compete. And I'm like fiddling a harp right now, but, you know, in general, it's our health. These fans are paying for us to compete. And the people who are making the big money off of it, that 94% of the money is UFC and not the fighters.
Well, it's, you know, it's an age-old issue as far as how long the sport has been set up like it is, and, you know, it's dying down a little bit, Tito. The calls, the public calls to change it, people taking stands, and I don't know if that's, I don't know anything about this. I truly don't. I mean, a lot of this is behind the scenes, smoke and mirrors. A lot of it is undisclosed payouts and things. That's one of the problems for fans, you know, is we just don't really, or reporters for that matter. It's not like we have access to Zuffa's financials, but we have to take everybody at face value when they throw numbers out there and things like that. And, you know, you're at a point in your career where you've thought throughout your entire career about this and kept great track of this. I wonder if you can simply tell us now, as you've wrapped up your UFC career, and you mentioned how big it was for your family and for your future to beat Ryan Bader so that you could get those top-end, top-scale paydays against Rashad and Little Nog in before you called it a career. How much did you make, all told, in your fight career?
All told, I made enough to take care of my kids now, that's for sure.
Well, I hope so.
I mean,
can you give us a number?
I think a number is, you know, something that should be private.
Okay, that's fair.
You know, I made enough to take care of my kids' schooling. I still got to work hard to take care of my future for myself, to keep my lifestyle the way it is. And, you know, luckily I paid out on a lot of things. But, I mean, I'm looking to sell my Big Bear house. So anybody wants to buy my Big Bear house, I'm looking to sell it. And that takes a big chunk out of my net every
You paid
month.
2.1 for that, or 2.3?
2.1.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I pay a big chunk for that every month. But I mean, I look at other means to make money. I mean, that's why I started my clothing company. It's doing fairly well. You know, my nutrition line that I'm still trying to, you know, keep above water. I was doing okay. Management company is not going to make me millions of dollars, no possible way. The only reason I did my management company was to help fighters. I mean, I'm not here to make, you know, millions off of fighters because of it. I'm not gonna. There's no way I'm gonna. It's just a factor that I want to fight for the fighters. I want to give them an opportunity to be able to retire and have something to give back on. And maybe we could battle. Maybe we could fight for a retirement fund for these fighters for the UFC. And I think managers in general, I think we all need to come together and make this happen. That's the only way it's going to happen is all the fighters come together and make it happen.
Yeah, for sure. You've mentioned a few times, Tito, throughout the course of this interview, how you started doing T-shirts really before anyone else. There were T-shirts, but certainly your own line, branding your own line, Punishment Athletics and things like that. It all sort of started with the aforementioned Guy Metzger T-shirt. At the time, you were working part-time as well as fighting at Spanky's adult novelty shop, right? And so they sponsored that first shirt you wore. I just, let's just say, fudged your ass, a play on Stone Cold Steve Austin's tagline at the time. I just whipped your ass. And the T-shirt thing was a huge part of the Tito Ortiz package, the entertainment package that was Tito Ortiz on UFC broadcasts. You know, what would he wear afterwards? What would he say afterwards? And, you know, Gay Metzger is my this, and the Shamrock flip-off incident with the T-shirt and all of that. Huge part of who you were. When you first put that T-shirt on for that adult store you were working for at the time, did you really know that was going to be something that would catch on, or did you only realize it afterwards that there was something, money to be made in kind of the T-shirt wearing part of this business, for lack of a better phrase?
I only realized it after. That was strictly, I got paid $5,000 to put that shirt on, and at the time, I think I made $7,500 for that shirt. Or excuse me, I made $7,500 for the fight. And I made $5,000 to put a shirt on. I was like, sweet. And I didn't even realize it. It said Extreme Associates on the front. It said I was Metzger on the back. And it was a production company. And it was no more than that. The guy, Bob Black, who's in the adult industry, came up to me, hey man, you wear the shirt, I'll give you $5,000. I was like, sweet, sign me up, let's do it. Then after that, it was expected. What is Tito's going to do next? And I just started using my mind. I started using, my just little small things I started thinking about, and I just shirt after shirt after shirt after shirt. I just started putting different things. And as people looked at my career, it went from being very negative, very threatening towards my opponent to very positive, very motivating, to our troops, motivation for myself, for other fighters, for other people in general. I did so many different things through my career that it just changed. I evolved. I became a man. I became a businessman. I became, a motivation of people's lives. And I think that's what, people looked at this transition of the shirts that I wore. That's what I did.
Where did the flames come in? Because that was, your signature shorts, your signature hat, T-shirts, your entrances, when the UFC was still doing big, overly produced entrances. There was pyro and fire everywhere. Where did this whole flames thing start with you?
Well, the flame thing actually started with Von Dutch, before Von Dutch was even Von Dutch. They had flame shorts, and I was like, God, those flame shorts are cool. And then what I thought about it was we're allowed to knee in the UFC at the time. And if I knee him in the head, I'm going to catch his head on fire. And it was just kind of like the fireball kid. And I guess it goes back to Gomi in Japan. The what's the fireball kid?
Yep, that was his nickname. Yep.
Yep. But that was this idea in my head is I knee him in the head, I'm going to catch his head on fire. So I'm going to put flames on my shorts, and when I knee you in the head, I'm going to cut you up. There's be blood everywhere because I'm going to hit you so hard. And I stuck with it. It was an image. It was something that worked. I was a big fan of Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan would say your prayers and take your vitamins. Mine was I'm going to kick your ass. You better be ready. That was just straight up bad boy image. And I ran with it, and I stuck with it. I watched Ali do it in professional boxing. He would talk so much smack about his opponent, but when he stepped in, he fought. And that's what I did. Every time I stepped in, I fought. I put my life on the line, and I competed like no other. It wasn't like I talked a bunch of smack. I went in and I got knocked out in the first 30 seconds. I went in and out, and I fought, and I fought my ass off like no other. And I think the fans loved me because of that.
Shortly after Zuffa took over the company, you were the top name, you were the centerpiece guy, and they were experimenting with what kind of look and feel they wanted to their pay-per-views, what look and feel they wanted to their entrances for their main event stars. And man, to watch the entrances today, which are really bare bones, they walk out through the people, it's dramatic, but to watch your entrances against Sinisic and Matyushenko with all the production elements, the screens going off, the flame shooting, the synchronized music, you coming out by yourself down the ramp with no, corner men flanking you and things like that. It was just a different time, and I wonder what you think of that type of entrance and presentation for fighters, and if that's something missing today in the UFC.
Well, I think so. I was behind a lot of that production. I'm the one that thought of those things. When I fought Shamrock and I came blazing up through the ground, that was my idea. I wanted that. That's what I wanted. I was like, this would look so cool if we did this. And Dan was like, you think? I was like, yeah, dude, this would look sick. Let's do this way. And we did it, and it looked amazing, with the flames, with the sparks coming down like a wave of flames. That was my idea. That's my artist side. My clothing kind of speaks for itself. I have about 90% say-so of my clothing company, of all the designs that come out. I was an artist when I was in high school. 2 years of college I did art class. I loved it. My dad was a great artist. He was a great drawer, and I think it's just that side of me that if you want it done right, you do it yourself. And that's why, people look at, the press conference I did with Cris Cyborg. When it came to the speaking side of it, I didn't do so well because my mind was so focused on doing the stage, doing the tables, doing the banners, the Content 360 on it, the food, setting up all the interviews, setting up all the cameras, getting everything set for these guys. And I kind of forgot about what I needed to do in general, and I would speak for my agent, or speak for my client. And it was just having that side of, I want to do everything myself. People who walk into Punishment Training Center, my gym, and they'll walk in and they're like, wow, this place is amazing. I did it myself. I scrubbed the floors. I didn't pay for someone to do it. I'm Mexican, man. We do work ourselves. If you want it done right, you do it yourself. I scrubbed the floors. I painted them. I laid the floors. You know, the artwork, the colors. I wanted to look good on camera. And people love it. People walk in, it's clean, it's immaculate, and that's what I wanted. Through my career, I've done those things, you know, as far as the walkout shirts, you know, the beams, the color schemes, everything I want to make it look good so it look good on camera. And that was my ideas. I did that. And
You're always very image savvy, very much so. You know how to make an impact on the camera, and you know that lives on today. I mean, people still talk about your entrances, whether they loved you or hated you. They know that you created something that was different when you came to the cage in that time, when that was how the UFC, you know, kind of gave you the leeway to explore those things. And I'm glad you mentioned in talking about the flame motif, the idea of knees. And, you know, the idea of you kind of thinking of setting a guy's head on fire with the knees, because when it comes to Tito Ortiz's signature in-cage style, as anybody knows, it was your ability to carve guys up with knees and elbows and punches from inside their guard, get them on the ground, get position, avoid being submitted, and pound them out. And you kind of were the next wave of ground and pound after, you know, the formative days of Mark Coleman and, you know, headbutting and just basically holding a guy and grinding him out. You brought a lot more, you know, kind of sophistication to the way you could drop elbows in certain positions, just as dangerous inside a guard as having passed it. And we don't see that as much today, and including from you at the end of your career. You know, you had the injuries you talked about, but, you know, toward the end you had a little bit more trouble getting that game going to the extent you did during your peak. And I wonder if you can give us a sense, considering how you leveraged ground and pound to become a huge star in the sport, how ground and pound has changed in mixed martial arts. Is it really even the same thing as what you were executing, because guys are getting up so much more now?
I think that's what it was. I think people started realizing, seeing what Chuck Liddell did, and me and Chuck, we mastered that. That was doing the wall walk. I learned that from Frank Shamrock. He taught me that. And then when I went and trained with Chuck Liddell, I taught him that. And that was one of the things. As soon as you find the wall, is get your butts against the wall and use your shoulders and get up, 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 up. Don't stay on the floor. Don't stay in the person's guard. And if you're a lot of jiu-jitsu guys who keep the guys in the guard, they get pounded out. You know, another person who I guess has watched my tapes is George St. Pierre. I mean, he does an amazing job with his ground and pound.
Mm-hmm.
His ground and pound is elite. You know, through the ending of my career, my ground and pound wasn't great because, you know, I was suffering from some injuries, man. You know, when you don't have a back 100% and your core's not as strong as it normally is, it's hard to kind of shove someone against the fence. And when you do, all of a sudden they automatically go, I better not stay here. I better get the hell up. If not, Tito's going to pound me out. And I think people put that into their game plan by getting up, by getting the wall walk. And you start opening up a total different can of worms on somebody when they started realizing it's not good to stay in the guard against Tito Ortiz or against anybody who has a great ground and pound.
After that second Guy Metzger fight, you were on the mic, you know, and you were talking all kinds of smack, and that's where the Ken feud started, which of course made perhaps more money than any feud in UFC history. The only other one in the running, there are others in the running, but one of them surely is your feud as well with Chuck Liddell. But all of that said, you know, you say after you did that interview in the Metzger fight and caused that scene that you didn't really know who the character was that you were playing. It was coming out of you, but you felt like you were learning who this guy was going to be because, you know, in the very beginning, fighting for free, you know, the Wes Albritton fight that night, losing to Guy Metzger in the guillotine, you were still kind of a raw kid. You know, you were a wrestler. You went in there knowing what you wanted to do, but you weren't really minded towards what kind of persona am I going to be? What kind of image maker am I going to be? It seems like you grew into the role. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you meant when you say you didn't know who the character was that you were playing? It's almost like you found yourself going towards it even though you didn't really intend to.
You know, I think it just came down to, it was a personality in me. I was being a little punk rock kid, you know, always talking back to the kids, always trying to talk smack to me. I was trying to defend my ground, you know. And while I was in there, it didn't matter if it was the Lions Den with 15 guys in that corner. I didn't care. I came from a gang. It was about respect. And Bolander talked a bunch of smack on me. The guy Metzger talked a bunch of smack on me. And you know, the person who talks last talks the loudest. And I had my chance to do that after I beat him. And I was going to say what was on my mind. I didn't hold anything back, and there was nothing choreographed. There was nothing premeditated. It was just things that were just popping off the top of my head. You know, I remember when Goldie, after I fought Bolander, he's like, yeah, so how do you feel after you beat the Lions in? I go, well, it's pretty much like beating the little alley cat, send him back to litter box. That was thought of right then and there. And it was just set in my mind. I don't know, it's maybe the charisma that was in me. I don't know. I mean, I always had something about me. I remember my mom telling me just stories. Like, Tito, you'd walk into a room when you're a kid, and people would attract to you. People always want to know, who's this kid? Why is he talking the way he's talking? Why is he saying the way things he's saying? And I've had that. I mean, I remember when I was in high school wrestling, people would come over to watch my matches when I would drill. There'd be 30 people around us just watching me. And that's what I did through my whole career, because when I would say something, when it was done and over with, people would go, holy, I can't believe he just said that. I looked back on it, I was like, I was saying what was on my mind. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt anybody's feelings, but this is just what was on my mind. I was defending myself.
And you realized after it, right, that this is actually good for business. I mean, even if people were going lashing out at you and hating you for the way you were presenting yourself and the things you were saying, certainly it made sense to your wallet to keep acting that way, right?
Yeah, of course it did. You know, people talked about it. People want to know what I was doing next. Well, what's going to happen in the next fight? And that's something that I took from Tank Abbott. I mean, me and him, we used to talk all the time. He's like, Tito, it don't matter if you win or lose. What matters is if people talk about you when the fight's over. And that's what I did. And good thing I went out and I won, and I won, and I won, and I won, and won the world title and defended 5 consecutive times. I did the things that no other fighter at the time were ever doing. I was the first light heavyweight champion, and I defended my world title 5 consecutive times. You know, I started fighter cards, and I made fighter cards, and I put my stats on them, and I would go out literally before the event would even start, and I put a fighter card on every single chair throughout the whole arena. And it was the promotion side. It was the hustle side of it. And I understood about promotion. A lot of fighters don't understand that. They think they just got to get in the cage and fight and everything's going to come to them. No. You got to go out and you got to work. You got to do the extra things. Go out and do speech classes, you know. Think of things that people want to hear. Get things that people want to find intriguing, find association to. And that's what I did through my whole career. And, you know, the bad boy image stuck perfect. And, you know, I just held it tight to me and I ran with it.
Now, before you were talking about how you've been in UFC your whole career, and that's been something that a lot of other guys can't say, and certainly that speaks to the level of competition that was put in front of you. There are those asterisks though in your career where you fought Jeremy Screeton outside of the UFC in December '98 between the Metzger loss and then coming back. There was that kind of 2-year gap there where you didn't come back to the UFC for a little while. And there was also a fight before the Wes Albritton fight that Larry Landless promoted a show in a high school gym, I think in Rosemead, California. And I've heard about this, but I want to get on the record here in this interview, in this format, everything you can tell us about that fight, because it probably, I don't know if you got paid for it, it most certainly wasn't sanctioned, but tell us about that perhaps lost fight in Tito Ortiz's career.
Well, that was actually, I did get paid for it. I fought, I think it was 2 weeks before the first UFC fight. I wanted to make sure I was ready for the UFC. I fought a jiu-jitsu guy who had okay stand-up, and we fought for 8 minutes to draw. And I gave him the worst ass beat I think he's ever had in his life. My palms hurt so bad because it was open hand strikes. Larry Landis gave me a call and he says, I got to fight for you. You want to fight? And it was just a reality check for me, just to make sure that I was mentally ready, if I was physically ready. And I went out and I fought and I won. And I remember after the fight was over, like, well, everybody, this is Tito Ortiz. He'll be fighting UFC 13. This is his trial, so everybody please support him. And everybody screamed and cheered. And I knew I was ready to fight.
Wow. Who was it that you fought, Tito?
I don't remember his name. I think it was Hernandez. I'm not familiar with his name.
So it wasn't somebody who, it wasn't someone who went on to have an MMA career?
No, I think I stopped his MMA career at that point. As wow. I did many other guys.
Yeah, that was something I'd heard about, and yeah, if you got paid for it, it should be in your record, right? If someone can find the name.
No, well, I didn't get paid for it, so it was for free.
Oh, it's for free. I thought you said you did. Oh, okay.
No, I did not, because that was the time I was an amateur wrestler, and I was wrestling at Golden West Junior College on scholarship, so I couldn't compete in any kind of competition that had wrestling in it. So that's why I fought in UFC 13 as a free competitor.
What was your relationship?
That night for free.
You mentioned Tank Abbott. People first knew you, as far as the UFC, as a guy who was helping Tank Abbott get ready to brush up his wrestling. I mean, you weren't even necessarily interested in a fight career of your own, but through Paul Herrera, who had coached you as a kid and was an associate of Tank Abbott, you guys hooked up and you helped him work out for wrestling. And eventually, he helped kind of smooth the way for you to get into the UFC because he was a star. He had a lot of pull in the organization at the time. And, it wasn't always smooth sailing between you two, and there was kind of an evolution of the relationship. And at some point, I think you even cited him as the reason that you were kind of frozen out of the UFC in that period I just talked about, that 97-98 period. Can you just give us the kind of, beginning to end, just the general evolution of your relationship with Tank Abbott and where you guys stand today?
Well, it really came down to he needed a wrestling partner. I was at Golden West Junior College. I was state champ at the time, and I wrestled with him, and I would take him down at will. I single leg, double leg, high crotch. I would hold him down. He couldn't get away from me. I remember thinking, I was like, God, I could do this well against this guy. I mean, I never sparred with him. I never put on the gloves with him. I was too afraid to get knocked out by him. I didn't want to get punched in the face by him because he was knocking people out in the UFC. But, I mean, I would own him in wrestling. I mean, I didn't know jiu-jitsu at the time. It was just wrestling. It was good takedowns. Like I said, I hit single legs, I hit doubles, I hit high crotches. I'd hold him down. He couldn't get away from me. And then I watched Jerry Bolander fight, and I was like, I think that name looks very familiar.
Yeah.
I wrestled him in high school, and I disowned him in high school. And he pretty much got me into thinking about fighting. And I told Tank I wanted to fight. And he says, "Oh, you think you're ready for that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, no, I know I'm ready for it." And I got my first try at UFC 13, and I competed. I ended up going back to college, finished my second year in junior college, won the state title again. I got my full ride scholarship to Cal State Bakersfield. I got in a fight outside of the college. Got in a fight with some skinhead guys. One of them beat up my friend, and one of the bigger guys tried to tackle me, and I got him in a guillotine, and ended up choking him unconscious. A couple of his buddies hit me in the head with bottles, and I thought if I let go of this guy, that these guys are going to hurt me. So he was the biggest guy. I choked him out unconscious. He flopped on his back. I stomped on his face a couple times. I turned around and I swung at a couple other guys, and they're just like screaming, "Just get out of the house! Just get out of the house!"
Wow.
I took off. I ran. Cops arrested me. The reason they arrested me is because I was friends with Tank Abbott, and I was starting to fight. No recognition, knowing these guys were skinheads, and they were beating up people. That didn't happen, so I ended up getting arrested. I got out. I had to get a lawyer. It cost me $1,500. I asked Tank to help me out. He said, sure. And then like 2 days later, I need to pay for the lawyers. I was like, hey, can you give me the money? He's like, I ain't your dad. I ain't take care of your shit. You take care of yourself. I was like, dude, I help you out of your camps. You don't pay me anything. Just give me the money. I'll pay you back. I want to get my financial aid. And he said, no, I ain't your dad. I ain't take care of you, punk kid. I was like, all right, fine. I went to my girlfriend at the time, to her parents, and I asked her, her parents, if they could lend me the money, and I gave it back to her. I said, sure, of course. So I ended up having to do some jail time for it, and I was going to come back. I ended up going to Cal State Bakersfield, going to coach in CII. I left Bakersfield because he was a complete asshole. I hated him. And I got a job at Spanky's. I told them I wanted to fight. They paid for my ride to go to UFC Brazil. I made my first fighter cards. And actually, I've already had a couple fans come up to me and have me sign them. It's funny than hell. My first fighter cards I ever had. Had my phone number on the back. And I went to John Peretti, and I told him, I'll crush any of these middleweight fighters here. I guarantee you. He's like, who are you? I'm Tito Ortiz. I go, watch UFC 13. I go, guy met you, got lucky. I go, next time it won't happen that way. And I went home, came back, started working, and all of a sudden I get a call and they said they want me to fight Jerry Bolander. I'm like, done deal, let's do it. And then I fought Jerry, beat Jerry, got a rematch at Metzger, fought Metzger, beat him, fought Frank Shamrock, lost to him in a 3-round decision. The guy I worked for at Spanky's brought me into his office and he said, you know what, Tito, the job isn't for you. I'm like, what are you talking about? And I'm on time every day. I sell merchandise like no other. He's like, no, I got to let you go. I'm like, dude, I need to pay for my bills. I pay for my apartment. I pay for my food. He's like, no, I'm going to sponsor you. I want to pay for your apartment. I'm going to pay for your food. I pay for your cell phone. I want you to train to be a fighter. I think you can become a world champion. And so I went and trained with Frank Shamrock because he didn't want a rematch. And I fought Vanderlei Silva for the vacant world title and became a world champion, man. And history's been set since then.
Yeah, that really is the formative kind of run. That is kind of the formative set of circumstances that put you on the path. The Vanderlei fight, you won that belt. I did get a question on Twitter when I said I was going to be interviewing you. What happened to that belt, the old SEG belt? Do you still have it?
Yes, I do. I have all my belts. I have all 5 of the belts that I've defended. Actually, my 5th title defense, they're supposed to let me keep my belt, and they gave me a belt, and it was a heavyweight championship belt. You can just see it in really small letters, so you couldn't see it on TV. And they said they'd give me another one. They never gave me another one, so they owe me a belt. UFC owe me a belt, and they never gave me a belt, so they stiffed me on a belt.
So they make new ones. So in your case, they made new ones every time you defended it because you wanted to keep a belt. Yeah.
They made a new one because each time they changed their logo. Besides the last 3 belts, they didn't change the logo.
This is a fascinating point in your career, Tito, after the Vanderlei fight, because Dana White becomes your manager. And this is Dana White before he was the impresario of the UFC, before he was kind of the embodiment of the UFC, the attitude behind the UFC, one of the biggest, most recognizable names in the UFC, all of this. This was, like you said earlier, the Dana who was sort of awkward in interviews, totally different guy, receding hairline, all that stuff. And he becomes your manager after the Vanderlei fight, and he promises you quite a bit. He paints a picture for you about where he thinks he can take you if you let him manage him. And at first, you were kind of skeptical about it, and eventually you got the word and you got the endorsement from some people who you trusted, including Wayne Merriman, who's a long-time name in the fight business. And you said, all right, I'll go with Dana. Can you help us understand that period, that time period, who Dana White was, and what picture he painted for you that got you to sign with him? What did he have you picture in your head about where you were headed?
Well, Dana was actually a Rivalries kickboxing trainer at a gym in Las Vegas. I know he trained a few other people. Wayne Harriman was a really close friend of mine, and he told me that Dana has the backing of the Fertittas, and I know the Fertittas being billionaires. I was like, wow, how could I go wrong? And he said he came to Dana came to my house, Huntington Beach, came to my apartment. He sat down. He said, so give me a chance to manage your career. He goes, I think you could be a big star in the sport. He goes, you're already a big star in the sport. You're the world champion. He goes, I think I can get you a lot more money. I think I can get you pay-per-view. I think I can get you a bigger purse. And I was like, I think I deserve that too. I mean, I go out and I do all the promotion. I make fighter cards. I give the fans what they want to see. You know, I do what other fighters don't do. And he says, I believe so too. I think you work really hard, and let's get you paid for working really hard. So I remember sitting in his office in Las Vegas and him talking to Bob Meyerowitz saying that we think he deserves this much for pay-per-view, and he deserves this much for show up and this much for win. And if you don't like it, we'll go elsewhere. And he hung the phone up and he looked at me and he goes, I hope I make the right decision. And I was like, you know what, Dana, I trust you. I'm giving you my career in your hands, and I'm trusting you. I believe in you. I think we can do it. 2 days later, we had a call back from UFC saying, we'll give you whatever you want. Not a problem at all.
Wow.
And I learned from that. And that's what, through my career, that's what he taught me how to do it. I didn't know any other way to how to do it. That's how, and so when I was negotiating against them, that's what he showed me. And now I was looked down upon by showing something that he showed me how to do for negotiations. I never knew any other way how to do it. That's the way I learned how to do it. And so, I mean, as I look through my career, I made a lot of bad decisions because of the way he taught me.
Well, you said about his style when he was that Dana White that he knew how to push without pushing too hard, and he wouldn't budge on the important deal points, knew how to push without pushing too hard. Could you explain to us what you mean by that when you phrase it that way?
Well, I think he didn't ask for over a super substantial amount of money. He just enough where they would say yes. And I think they looked at the numbers and they've seen what was happening on pay-per-view and so forth, and that's what it really came down to, and that's what made sense, and that's what he did. And then when they agreed upon it, we got it done. I got a contract, and I was making twice the money I was making, and I was making pay-per-view off of it. But we never hit that threshold of pay-per-view during that time, not until Zuffa took over the company. And then all of a sudden, when Zuffa took over the company, all of a sudden I was getting pushed off to one of his friends who was his attorney as our manager now. Now, there was, I think, a conflict of interest when that happened. And I was a kid. I didn't know any difference of it. Mm-hmm. And there was a complete conflict of interest of it. And every time I had asked my manager at the time, Jim Gallo, I was like, hey, since I'm making a little bit of money, don't you think we should be asking for a little bit more money than I'm getting paid right now? He's like, no, we don't ruffle any feathers, man. Don't do that. Don't do that. I was like, yeah, but it doesn't seem right. For some reason, it just doesn't seem right. It's like, no, we don't ruffle any feathers. So come to realize that they're just working together and kind of giving me what they think that I deserve and not what I thought I deserved. And I was going outside of doing the interviews, going on the road and working my butt off. And I really come to see that my manager wasn't looking out for my best interest, so that's why I got rid of him.
That was, like you said, Jim Gallo. And in the very beginning, when Dana went from being fight manager to UFC president, there were a lot of guys. Gallo was involved with boxers. He'd been around for a long time. A lot of guys that he had kind of under his wing. I don't know, in the beginning, did you get the impression, Tito, that Dana wanted Gallo to actually be the managers of all the top fighters so he could have that pipeline to negotiate with them?
100%. He managed Chuck Liddell. I think John Lewis. There's a lot of other fighters that at the time he was managing, but just the big fighters, not the mediocre fighters. He just manages the big fighters at the time.
Now, did Dana, if I'm hearing this right, Tito, did Dana get you your first cut of pay-per-view, or did you have that deal before he was your manager?
No, Dana got my first cut of pay-per-view.
So did he introduce that idea to the UFC of giving a guy a percentage, or were there other fighters who actually got that, a piece of the buys?
No, he was the first person to do that. He was the first person to see that happen. But it had only happened after a certain...
amount of buys.
Yes, a certain amount of buys.
And at the time you said that wasn't really a threshold they were hitting, so you had that in your contract, yet you weren't really seeing the windfall, right?
No.
Yeah. When would you say that started? When would you say you actually started to see a boost in your check and see the pay-per-view was actually starting to make money for you? What fight?
UFC 40.
UFC 40. So the Shamrock fight, 150,000 buys.
Yep.
And that was the first time the UFC had gotten over six-figure buys since UFC 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that whole era when that curiosity factor was just so magnetic and so many people checked it out. What was that like to be in the middle of such big business all of a sudden for the UFC? Because they got Ken Shamrock to come back. You did an amazing job promoting the fight, the famous press conference where he kicks up the chair. I mean, when you look back on that, why was that fight the one to make that much money?
Because it was real. It was nothing fixed. There was real animosity there. People look at the Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz. That was fake. I like Chuck, and Chuck, he was fed the lines by Dana, and they were building something that wasn't real. I still like Chuck, man. He may not like me because of things I've said, but I've said nothing but the truth. And that animosity that me and Chuck had against each other, that was just built up by the UFC. They built that to build Chuck. Chuck was a yes man. Mm-hmm.
Well, you say that's the difference, Tito, but I wonder because really both the Chuck fights were even bigger. I mean, the UFC, the rematch in December 2006, that did over 1 million buys. The first time the UFC ever did that. And it seems like the manufactured grudge did just as well as the real one.
Well, I think at the time, I think it was just all time period. The second one, it was really off the build of having the Ultimate Fighter. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Chuck Liddell got built off the Ultimate Fighter. I think he got shown on a bigger scale, I think. You know, when we did the third fight with Shamrock, I mean, I think they had over 4.3 million viewers on free television. Now, if that was a pay-per-view buy, I mean, I think it would have hit over 1 million pay-per-views. Of course it would have. I mean, I made more money against Ken Shamrock than I did against Chuck Liddell. I made way more money. And it's just one of those things that I look at it, and it is what it is. You know, both fights I made great. I mean, both guys I fought against, I made great money, and I can't complain about it at all.
No,
but,
certainly.
Well, against Chuck, the first fight, I mean, I made $150,000. I mean, that was pennies. I mean, compared to what they made in pay-per-view, I mean, I think they made over $30 million in pay-per-view. I made $150,000. What am I doing different than boxers are doing? And Chuck Liddell caved in. Chuck Liddell sold out. Sold out on my friendship. Sold out on, I think, fighters in general.
Well, he basically said, I mean, whatever they want to pay me, I'm willing to take. I want to fight you. It doesn't have anything to do with the money.
Yeah, and I see it now, and Chuck Liddell's pretty much forgot about. People don't talk about him anymore at all. They talk about what he used to be, and that's it. And I look at this as a business, and when you forget about it as being a business, you forgot about, period.
If you ran into Chuck Liddell tomorrow, what do you think would happen?
Nothing. I'd say, what's up, dude? How you doing? I hope you're doing good, man.
Well, that's what you would say. What do you think he would say?
I don't know. I know after his last fight when he fought Franklin, I remember calling Dana as soon as it was over, and I called Dana. I go, "Hey, is Chuck all right, man?" He goes, "No, he's not doing good." And I was worried. And he was, no matter how much stuff you talked about me or how much hatred you try to say he had against me, we trained against each other. He came to my house. He sat up on my couch. You know, we ate together. We trained together. We blood, sweat, and tears with each other, man. We were friends. You know, me and Dana were really, really good friends. And it sucks because business and friendships never count. It never works together well at all.
Yeah.
And,
well, I mean, it got to the point, Tito, as you know, and everyone knows really because of the way it was broadcast and put together and pushed out there. It came to the point where there was a 90-minute documentary done, one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen, of, you know, Dana authorizing a documentary about preparing to box you per a contractual agreement, and you not showing up is the way it was framed in the documentary. And this is, you know, you were one of the top stars.
Are you talking about the fluff show for Dana White?
Whatever, yeah, and I want to ask,
is?
I need to ask you about it because I just don't understand what the goal was of all that.
To show how bad Dana was and that he's a billionaire, that he could roll around in Lear jets and he could box against former world champion, and that I was afraid to fight him. And the negotiation that ended up happening was I told him, I said, let's do a boxing match against each other. Any revenue earned from this, let's split it 50-50. And he said, okay. Well, when it came about, I said, let's do a contract. He said, oh, we can't do a contract. We can't do that now. What do you mean we can't do that now? We agreed upon it. He's like, well, we can't do that. I go, well, we're not going to box him, dude. Any fight I've ever fought against anyone, I've always had a contract in front of me. I want to know where the revenue's going. I want to know where the money's going. And he never had an answer for me.
Well, where did the idea come from in the first place, Tito? I mean, you said you introduced the idea.
For me.
Yeah,
it was my idea.
For what reason?
We used to spar with each other all the time.
Mm.
We used to spar with each other a lot, and I started getting the better of them. You know, I mean, 'cause I was never a boxer. I mean, but as I got better, I went to Don House. I got better and better and better and better, and I started getting the better of him, and this came about, and you know, we had a little bit of hatred, a little animosity towards each other, and I was like, you know what, it would be good to show on TV how good of an ass whipping I could give him. And when it came about, and he found a way to get out of it, was not do a contract, and I remember him being on the phone of saying, you know what, Tito, we got to go through it. Spike TV's going to shoot it, but I won't make you look bad. I promise you, dude. I won't make you look bad. I go, Dan, don't you dare go on TV and saying that I'm not showing up and sit there on the scale with your hands raised. And that's exactly what he did. and it hurt my image like no other. So many people to this date. I mean, what was that? 7 years ago.
2006.
Yep.
How did you possibly come back after that? How did you possibly make amends after that?
I don't think we ever did. And maybe the amends was in my own mind is saying Dana's my bitch on my shirt. That was my amends, which was a wrong way to do it. I shouldn't have done it that way. I shouldn't have gone the way I did by the things I did, and I apologize to him, and I apologize on interviews I've done, and I can never take it back. I know that. And like I said, I look at it, and I made little mistakes, and it hurt me. I could have made a lot more money, but at the time, I only knew as good as I knew.
It's kind of interesting, Tito, because it sounds like, to hear you lay it out, you learned a lot about negotiating, and you learned a lot about, how to increase your payday in fight sport from Dana. You like you talked about, you didn't really know anything about this. You didn't know how to drive a hard bargain. You don't know what to ask for. No one had even thought of, apparently, or put on the table getting a cut of pay-per-view buys before Dana, kind of brought that to the table for you. So it must have been weird. You must have felt like when he left and became the president, that you were you had something of an idea of how to negotiate, but you didn't have enough of an idea to where it sounds like in a lot of cases you were kind of taken for a ride and you were eaten alive because you had just enough of an idea to raise a stink, but maybe not enough savvy, enough experience to close the deal.
100%. And there was a lot of opportunities too that negotiations happen 3 weeks before my fights, 2 weeks before my fights. And I know a lot of fighters right now who listen to this right now who fight for the UFC. They did the same thing. They'll negotiate a guy's contract 2 weeks before a fight. They'll say, you lose your next fight, then you're gonna make half the money that we're offering you now. So you better take it now. And then they do things like I say. You'll watch UFC, and there will not be one guy built ever. In boxing, you watch guys getting built. They'll get tomato cans. Mm-hmm. They'll get built. They'll get built to be undefeated records. And the guys who have undefeated records right now, they've earned those undefeated records, man. And maybe those undefeated records didn't come from UFC, but if they have undefeated records and they fought in the UFC the whole time, they've earned them. Because UFC, the guys don't fight tomato cans, man. You're fighting guys who are tough as hell.
Let me just get one thing clear on the boxing thing, and I'll move off that, the fight with Dana, or the supposed fight with Dana. Was it something that Spike heard that you guys had agreed to do this and started getting the gears going on doing a documentary about it, and then it happened? Where was the pressure to actually go through with it? Why did it ultimately happen if it was clear you weren't going to show up? Where was the pressure?
I don't know. Was it Craig Palazian? He was on the phone. He said they wanted to do it, and and I go, well, me and Dan agreed upon 50-50 on any revenue that was coming from the money from that fight.
Did you picture it on pay-per-view, Tito?
I pictured it on pay-per-view, saw it cheap on pay-per-view. That's what I thought that they wanted to do and that we were going to do. All of a sudden it was on Spike, and as I started watching the show, I'm all, they're building Dana right now. They're building Dana into a bad guy. They're building Dana into one of the toughest guys in the world, and he's so rich, and he's running around in jets, and how bad he is training, and he's taking his time out of me, and how he's going to whip my ass, and I just saw it all coming, falling down on me, and it did. And I looked at it, and I just sat next to Jenna, just going, I can't believe this is happening right now. This is unbelievable.
Yeah, to watch that must have been, man. I was confused. I remember watching it, being like, this is, because I knew that the fight didn't happen, so I knew the documentary was building towards you not showing up, and you were still the biggest money earner for them, or one of the biggest. You were the star. I mean, they had to go and promote you after that. It's not like you weren't in the UFC when they aired this thing. Yeah,
well, I mean, it was a way for negotiations. It's a way to make me look bad, so they didn't have to pay me more money. It's all negotiation tactics.
That's a lot of work, Tito, just for a negotiation tactic. That's a lot of money and time spent there just for that.
Oh, well, a lot of money for them, where they're going to pay $150,000 to make it happen, or pay me $500,000 for a fight. Where's the money difference? You got to look at the numbers, man. I look at numbers. I look at ticket sales. I look at pay-per-view sales. I look at merchandising. I look at video games. I look at all the merchandise that is sold through the UFC that the fighters do not make.
That's one thing you
Crazy.
fought hard for, right, is your likeness, to protect your likeness so that if your
Yeah.
likeness sold in the future, you would get some of that, your kids would get some of that, all of that. Can you explain to us how
Yeah.
you managed to do that and how it's going to work for you for the rest of your life, what the deal ended up being?
Deal actually ended up being, I thought I would do the right thing and get a lump sum up front, which was shit. I got paid 50 grand, and they had to use my likeness forever.
And with no percentage of every T-shirt or, toy sold.
They said there's a 5%, but I haven't seen a check since then.
Uh,
I got one check, and that was it.
mm-hmm. Yeah, because I was thinking, to hear you put it the way you had in the past about, fighting for your likeness, that you were the guy to do it, because to my knowledge, nobody in the UFC has been able to negotiate a thing where if the UFC sells something with your likeness on it, 10 years down the road, you get a check. That's how it works in the WWE, so a lot of people look to that as kind of an example. But that's...
Well, I mean, when it comes down to is that they don't pay you, then all of a sudden you got to audit their books, and you're going to pay out of your own pocket to audit their books, and then all of a sudden you go into court, and now you got to go to court against $1 billion company. Is that smart? No.
So that's what's right. That's the mountain you have to climb to even find out if you're owed something. Yeah, so that's difficult.
Yeah.
He wanted to, Dana, when he took over the company, he was talking a lot about Pride. He was talking a lot about not merging with Pride, but sharing talent with Pride, you going to Pride, Sakuraba coming to the UFC. How close did any of that come? Was there ever a point where you were going to go to Pride under a talent sharing like Chuck did?
No, never. They wanted me for UFC because I was the person making their money. You look at all UFC fighters in UFC history, maybe Anderson Silva now, but I was the one who made the most money for the UFC, 100%. There's not another fighter in UFC history who's made that more money than me. I mean, to this point, maybe Anderson Silva now, but no.
Did you think you were ever going to fight Sakuraba? That was a fight Dana was saying he wanted to make happen.
I wanted to. I wanted to so bad. I wanted to fight him so bad, but they just couldn't make it happen. Pride at the time didn't want to sell their company, and they weren't going to make it happen.
If you could have one fight that you didn't ever get, who would it be against?
It'd probably be against Sakuraba. That'd
Really?
be a great match. Yeah. But I'm retired now, man. My body can't take any more training. It could take a fight, but you got to be in shape to fight. And people understand the fight starts in training, and we don't get paid to fight in the octagon. We get paid to train. That's what it is. When you're putting in 6 days a week, 8 hours a day, for 9 months or 9 weeks, that's a long camp, and it's just monotonous. And having a chance of getting injured between those camps, I mean, that was my last 5 years, 6 years of my career is training not to get injured. I didn't train to win the fights. I trained not to get injured, man. I wouldn't push myself super hard so I wouldn't get injured. I mean, my last 2 fights, I didn't even run. I rode a bike. That was my cardio, was riding a bike and sparring.
At UFC 51, you beat Vitor Belfort, split decision, February 2005. Ultimate Fighter 1 was getting started on Spike, and the UFC's fortunes were going to turn around in a very, very big way. Yet you were gone until April of 2006 when you came back to fight Forrest and then did the reality show. At the end of that year, of 2005, you came out. They announced you were back. In between that time, it wasn't easy for you, and I think you even had an instance where you were feeling so out of the loop, so left out, that you got behind the wheel and purposely crashed your car. It's a very dark time for you, but I wonder if you can help us understand what was going on in your head in between UFC 51 and UFC 59.
Well, I don't think I purposely crashed my car. I was a little intoxicated, and I was going a little fast. And, the reason I was intoxicated was they had the 10th anniversary of UFC, and they didn't invite me. Yeah. I took it to heart. I felt it as a disrespect. I helped so much as far as building the company. I hear Dana say in interviews of I was the only fighter in UFC history to damage the UFC like no other. And then all of a sudden I hear him saying the same thing about Randy Couture. I'm like, which one was it, me or Randy? And at the time, I really come to realize that these guys see me as a commodity, no more than that. And, I just was careless. I was very careless, and I made a mistake. That was a mistake that I never let happen again, and I've made sure I never drink and drive ever again. And little small mistakes, man, little mistakes like that happen. And thank God it wasn't on TMZ and blasted all over the internet. And, it was just something that was, by my house, close. I was safe. I totaled my Escalade, ripped off 3 rims, and I didn't have a scratch on me. God's looking over me, that's for sure.
It's got to be difficult for anybody who hasn't done something like you've done, been in the spotlight, been such a pivotal part of something, to understand what it feels like to then see that enterprise that you were involved with kind of acknowledge, the greats, acknowledge the history, and not mention you. It's got to be hard for someone who's never been in that position to understand what that feels like. What is the pull that you feel? Because you talked, Tito, about being a businessman your whole career, and this is business. Yet that's not a business way to react to that. That's a very personal and emotional and personally invested way to react to that. So I wonder if you can help us try to understand what it's like to kind of be erased, even temporarily, from history.
It sucks, man. And there was a time when they took me off the website. They took me off the UFC website. They try to just erase me from UFC history. And I was just beside myself going, how can these guys do that? And it was very personal. It's still personal, man. A lot of things they do is very personal towards me. Showing them, I think just recently it started changing where every time they ever showed me it was me getting punched, me getting taken down, me getting hit. It was never anything showing me in a good light. And I look at it and, I could sit there and dwell on the hatred, or if I could just work on my future and what's really been happening. And that's me excelling to the best I possibly can on my own. And I think people can really respect the factor that I've done it on my own. And, it is what it is, man. Can't do nothing else about it.
Let's just close that with this, because we're hearing you explain all this. We know the history. We know what you did in the cage, and the kind of numbers you pulled for the UFC, and the evangelizing that you did for the sport. Why would they want to show you getting punched all the time? What does it come down to? Maybe it wasn't just one fight. Maybe it wasn't just one dispute. But if you had to give a brief 2-line explanation of why they feel that way towards you, what would it be? Because I know a lot about all the history. We've talked at great length about all this history. You've been so gracious in sharing the details, but I still don't understand why it is so deeply and damn personal.
I don't know. Maybe because I wore that Dana's my bitch shirt. I don't know. Maybe the things I said. Maybe I carried myself the wrong way. I should have handled things a little different, I think. And I look back on it, and I'm human. I make mistakes. And as long as I'm learning from mistakes, I'll be fine. And I've learned from them so far.
Did you know it was over when you were stopped by Antonio Rogerio Nogueira? Did you know?
Did I know that my fight career was over?
Yeah.
No. My body still didn't heal from when Rashad kneed me in the chest, and that's what dropped me again when he kneed me in the chest again. My heart got bruised. My chest actually still is, to this date, still bruised from it. I think that chest bone takes a long time to heal. When I fought Nogueira, to me, I won the fight at the weigh-in. I cut 34 pounds in 3 days. That was the most weight I ever cut in my life. I thought I was going to die when I was on the scale. I was in bad shape. I had a neck problem. My neck was driving me nuts. My knee was driving me nuts. I had a lot of problems, just mentally, at home. There's so many other little things that go on in fighters, with the relationships and family and, fight camps and just things that just go on that people don't see the inlets. And
you mentioned about the Randy. I'm sorry, Tito. You mentioned about the Randy fight, that you had a plan of what you're going to say afterwards, but you lost. If you beat Forrest Griffin at UFC 148 in your final fight, how did you plan on addressing the people? What did you plan on telling them?
What do you mean, the fight that I won that they pretty much robbed from me?
Sure. Well, that aside, yeah.
I watched that fight over and over and over and over and over again, and it was the first fight I ever saw that they gave points for attempts or strikes thrown, not strikes landed. I watched that and I was like, when did that come about? That is complete bullshit. I couldn't believe it. I dropped him 2 of the rounds. I took him down the last round, and he won the round the last 30 seconds of the fight. I didn't understand that. But like I say, if I won the fight, I just say I want to thank my fans for my career that I given, and I wore my heart on my sleeve like no other fighter, and I can really respect it as one of the greatest champions ever graced this octagon. And I gave my heart and soul every time I fought, and if it wasn't for each one of you fans watching this fight tonight, I wouldn't be where I am. The people who inspired me to be a great person, because I could have been a horrible person, to be a great person, to be the person I am and the father I am and the fighter I am. I'm very thankful. And I'm thankful for Lorenzo for giving me an opportunity I have, and for Dana for teaching me the things that I've done. I'm just very thankful to be where I am today and to have my hand raised the way I did.
Let's close with a little word association. Are you game, Tito?
Sure.
We'll wrap it up with this. Paul Herrera.
Best friend.
Still to this day?
Still to this day.
Tank Abbott.
Stepping stone.
Kristen Ortiz.
Best friend.
Limp Bizkit.
Great rock band.
Eminem.
Inspired me through my tough times in life.
Pro wrestling.
50% of my career.
Oh, sorry. Please tell me more on that. That's fascinating. What do you mean 50% of your career?
I always wanted to be a professional wrestler. My whole life I always did. When I was a kid, I used to wake up and everybody go out and play, and I'd watch wrestling. I'd watch, Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage, Jimmy Superfly Snuka, got the Iron Sheik. I used to watch these guys, and I was like, Mom, I want to be those guys one day. Mom, I want to be those guys one day. And I remember, my mom telling me, going, Tito, he used to tell me one day your name's going to be in big bright lights saying Tito Ortiz. And it's weird because I achieved that, not even knowing what I was going to do in life. And I achieved that because it was a dream I had deep down inside of me. And it was an inspiration in my life that I believed of a dream. I never stopped dreaming that. And I never stopped trying to achieve that goal. And I did it. And it was because of professional wrestling that I wanted to do it.
Is that still possible? Your MMA career is over, but is your athletic career over? Could you become a pro wrestler?
Could I? Of course I could.
You want to?
Could my body handle it? I don't know if my body could handle it. And you understand, people think it's fake wrestling. It's not fake.
Yeah.
The outcome's fake, yes. But the battling, the slamming, and the throws they do, and the hitting the chairs and all that stuff's real. Those guys take a beating. I have nothing but respect for guys that are in WWE or guys that are on the professional wrestling stuff. The Rock is a guy who I really look up to. I think he's an awesome wrestler, an awesome actor. Each one of his movies just get better and better and better and better. I want to know who his acting coach is because I got to go to him.
Yeah. So you're not sure if you could handle it, but have there been offers on the table to transition into pro wrestling?
No, not really.
Okay.
I haven't really attacked that yet, that's still, I hadn't even been retired for a year yet.
Right, it's true.
And I even got all my surgeries done. I haven't recovered from my neck surgery yet. I'm only, 10 weeks yesterday that it's been. When I'm 6 months after neck surgery, then it'll be better.
Just a few more word associations, and then we'll let you get out of here. UFC 33.
Making history.
9/11.
Shook our world.
Yuki Kondo.
Showing my heart.
Ronda Rousey.
Best featherweight woman champion in the world.
Joe Silva.
Wow, that person has changed completely. A guy who used to believe in me.
Which I take to mean you don't feel believes in you anymore.
Nah, not at all. He's changed. He's not the person anymore. He's not the person he used to be. He's changed. I hope he hears this interview because he has changed. Him and Dana, both those guys aren't the people they used to be.
Lee
Money
Murray.
changed people, man. Lee Murray. Felon.
You went technical there. You went legal on that one.
That's all he is. I have nothing to say about the guy. I have nothing bad to say about the guy. He made mistakes, and that's him. He had his opportunity. His opportunity got thrown away. You become a felon.
Jerry Bolander.
Inspired me.
Huntington Beach.
My life.
Two more. Jenna Jameson.
I wish I could say her.
And finally, Dana White.
Wish you could be friends again.
Looking ahead, Tito Ortiz. It's what he's done, although he spent an awful lot of time today on the Sherdog Radio Network Rewind looking back, and we thank him so very much for it, because Tito, as you know, your run in mixed martial arts was, in a lot of ways, one of a kind. It was a pleasure to help understand and connect kind of disparate and separate pieces of your life and your career here on the interview. You've been so gracious with your time and your insight. We look forward to talking to you again at some point in the future because, as you've pointed out, there's still a bit to come as the Huntington Beach bad boy is concerned.
Well, thank you very much. And all the fans who listen to this, this has been a long interview. You guys listen to this whole thing. I want you guys very much. You understand, I'm no different from anyone else. I just try to do my job the best I possibly can because when I'm dead, I want to be remembered forever.
Tito Ortiz, ladies and gentlemen. Tito, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, man.